For those of you who've stayed on with us throughout this conclave today, thank you so much for hanging around. And I'm really excited to close with a fireside that we're going to have with our leadership. We're going to be discussing certain themes that are quite important for all of us. And I think that is the reason we are here gathered in this room and why we've spent the day talking about various problem statements. We're going to be learning more about how AI is influencing the ways in which people are learning, working, making decisions. And these insights have led to further questions around what opportunity, social progress, and governance is going to look like moving forward. And on that note, I'm really excited to invite Pavan and Dr. Pramath Sinha on this stage for a fireside chat to discuss these themes further. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Pramath Sinha. He's the founder and chairman of the Board of Trustees of Ashoka University. He's a founding senior partner of G3, India's only education-focused strategy and implementation firm. He was also the founding dean and is a member of the executive board of the ISB. Pavan, of course, as he's been introduced already, is the director of CSBC. Inviting both members on stage, please. Thank you. Just to start off, I'd like to apologize for looking at my phone for a couple of these moments because I'll have my questions here. I hope that's all right.
She's an alumni of Ashoka University, and that's the special reason why we have chosen her. So it will be to have a product of your own institution here.
She's under pressure.
Then let me start off by saying that as an employee of Ashoka, I'm very glad I've got a full reimbursement on an education that I've really valued. But to start with, and on that note, right, it is something that I'm immensely proud of and grateful for. Just the years that I've spent being trained and coming out as a product of something that many years ago you and Ashish have conceptualized. And that is something that's really valuable to me. And so it is with that bias and that curiosity that I want to ask the following questions, right? The first one being, Pramath, that in this age of increasing automation and increasing skill dependency being more on AI than perhaps a lot of what has been human labor for years, how do we anticipate these pocket tutors transforming what we think in education needs to look like and what a university needs to look like today as well as tomorrow?
I don't know. I think it's tough to answer any question about education in India without understanding the nuance of the multiple levels and layers of education systems that we have in the country. I'm very hopeful that actually, in general, this is going to be a net positive. And I tell you because I come from a very hopeless point of view. My view is that the quality of education by and large that we are providing, whether at schools or colleges, and I was hearing some of the last bits of the earlier panel, is just very poor quality. And with all its drawbacks, I think if we can leverage AI to bring better, I think we can leverage AI to be better than what we are offering people in the classroom for a very large swath of Indian students. I think the onus is on us to make sure that it works right and you take care of all the problems. But the problems we have today with live teachers in the room is insurmountable. We've been talking about it for however long I can go back, and we haven't solved for it. So this is a moment, and I've often said this, that whether it was online education earlier or it is using AI now, the scale and quality issue which we have for the large part in education, this is a moment for us to not lose that. So I worry about it when people dismiss it or say, look, this is dangerous, and our kids will be damaged forever. Right? We are damaging our kids now. What are we talking about? So I now where do you draw the line about where the damage is? I don't know. You have somebody else may have a different view, but there's a large number of kids who are today being damaged by human intelligence in the classroom. With no offense to any teachers here, I think the challenge at the other end is the challenge that the world faces. That you are very privileged to go to Ashoka. Or anybody here is probably from a position of privilege in education, and how that needs to change, we can talk about. I think that is, to be honest, unending debate, and it's less relevant for us strategically as a country. Uh, the world will muddle through it and solve it, and we'll make mistakes and we'll figure it out. I teach a class at ISB. All my students, it's impossible to assess students now. Totally impossible. Whatever assignment you give, they come back with LLM generated assignment. Then some professor told me, look, why don't you give them the LLM assignment and ask them to comment on that? Well, they put that through the LLM too, right? So you get Gemini to generate something, and you give it to Claude to comment on, and so it's endless. And I've been to Penn, where I'm a graduate of, which has a university-wide commission on AI. They have no answers. I was just with somebody from Harvard Medical School over the weekend. Their president sat all the heads down and said there's a hiring freeze because our whole model is going to get disrupted. That was the excuse he gave for the hiring freeze, not funding cuts, not Trump, but AI. And said, but we don't know what this all means. So that's the other end of the spectrum. And honestly, I'm less concerned about that. I'm concerned about the millions of kids and college students for whom we can actually transform education. If we can actually bring them pocket tutors, assessments, and the whole works that supplements, adds, and drastically improves the quality of education that we are providing. I believe that it's pointless to debate, because what are we are comparing to nothing. So I'm sorry to say, it sounds cynical to say this, but it's better than nothing. At least it's more reliable. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I think that
directionally we are going. I'm setting the tone for how I'd like to see this evolve. Yeah.
Noted. I think given that, I also then want to skip past perhaps some of the questions around problem solving for certain immediate hurdles that we anticipate, and move perhaps to another question I had in mind, which is that since we are looking at this from a very forward looking perspective, and we have the optimism that we will solve for a lot of the problems that are coming up, what do you think this sort of method or vision of learning in education is going to look like, Pramath? I mean, when we're talking about streamlining it and increasing accessibility, what would that mean? What does that look like for us?
See, I think they're just in education. If you simplify it, at least the way I think about it, I'm no expert, but I'm wrestling with it. So the way I think about it is that I, as an individual, now have access to all the possible answers in the universe. So any possible answer based on prior knowledge is at my fingertips. And so I need to know what to ask. So for me as an individual, education has to become all about how do I ask the right question. And in the Ashoka context, this is a little bit cliched, because for 10 years we've been saying that's what Ashoka is about. So, but this is not about Ashoka. That's the simple way I think about it, and I come from a bias because I've already been talking about this. But I think the Anthropic CEO talked about this being, and it struck me. There was a TED talk, maybe now more than a year ago, where he talked about all the possible answers being there. You can debate the quality of the answer and all of that, the standard debates. But for a minute, I simplify it for myself that for any student anywhere, In fact, you can converse and get answers in any language at any level. And I, yeah, I wrote it to write Hindi. I use LLMs to write Hindi poetry yesterday for the first time in my life. And I was like amazed at what I could do. And it would convert it from prose to nazm to, you know, just plain verse, and in Javed Akhtar's tone or Firaq Gorakhpuri's tone. It's just mind boggling. So I have all of the answers. I need to ask the right question. At the other end, as an educator, I have an ability to really track learning at scale and deliver learning, mass learning, but mass education customized to an individual. And I don't think this is a pipe dream. I really don't believe it's a pipe dream. It can be done. And I think those are the two big chunks of things that are going to happen. How this will now change how a school is constructed, on how the higher education model will change, and will people still do 4-year degrees? I don't know. I think we have to figure that out. If anybody says they know, I'd like to meet them, and I'm skeptical. But I think those, from my perspective, and I'm not saying I again want to say I'm not a know-all, but the way I like to think about it, because I have to deal with it, I like to simplify it and say, how is it changing for the student, and how is it changing for faculty, administrators, and educators? And then if you take those two buckets, then you can kind of break it down and say, okay, what pieces of it can I do now? What pieces of it will happen later as the technology gets better, and so on.
Thanks so much for that, Pramath. I think that's very helpful to hear. And also, again, since we already mentioned it, very biased take, but yeah, since for the last 10 years we've been talking about asking the right questions, I'm feeling pretty grateful for that. But I'm also thinking that if we're moving from perhaps the aspirational view of being of being a master of some knowledge, now you are moving to perhaps someone who is then being perhaps more curious and learning how to ask the right questions. And this is kind of bringing me to something that Pavan, I think you were mentioning today, right? We are talking about um, having access to all knowledge at our fingertips, like Pramath put it. So, how does tacit knowledge fit into that entire landscape, as per you?
No, thanks very much for that question, Anandita. But before we get to the tacit part, the Polanyi's work on tacit dimension and so on, and whether AI can actually get into that space or not, it's increasingly looking challenging even there. We'll get to that. But I want to pause a little on what Pramath said a little earlier, and I think there's a critical distinction that he has implicitly made, and that is worrying about being a producer of knowledge to becoming a consumer of knowledge, a creative consumer of knowledge. And asking questions then puts you in that space where you need to know what to ask to be able to get the right answer that will satisfy you in a manner, or your company in a manner that is productive, right? So I think that shift in curriculum itself, that shift in focus itself, I think from being a creative producer to, from being an efficient producer to being a creative consumer, I think is a very powerful point. And I think that's a shift that I think increasingly liberal arts kind of education is likely to provide. We know what to ask and how to ask the right questions for us to be satisfied in an optimal manner and in a useful manner. The tacit dimension is a sort of a piece of, sort of philosophy that I got into thinking about, primarily because I was thinking, I did a bit of AI over the past 5-6 years, learned a bit of it, and what I noticed was that AI is essentially a statistical tool. It's statistics on steroids in some sense, right? And the data that it uses is codified knowledge, right? Wherever you put a wherever you've constructed a variable and attached some numbers or some words to them, it's able to capture that, and that codified knowledge then becomes a part of its repository that then it leverages to sort of supply you the answers to the questions that you want. And I was hoping that, that there is a form of knowledge that it cannot capture, because that's the big question, right? What can't AI do? Not what AI can do, but what can't AI do is the big question, because that's the space which is left for human autonomy and human purpose, and maybe even the purpose of education and so on, right? And I imagine that AI cannot get into that space because there is a form of knowledge that cannot be codified. So when a carpenter's child sits in the yard and learns carpentry from his or her father or mother, they're observing the skill. It's a form of apprenticeship. It's not codified. What do you mean by tacit knowledge? I mean, you can't write a book about how to ride a cycle. You just teach it, and it's only through practice that you acquire that knowledge. And human knowledge is either codifiable or non-codifiable, and the non-codifiable part gets transmitted intergenerationally, typically through apprenticeship. So I was hoping that AI will not get into that space. But in recent times, I've seen these really scary pictures of, in the morning, I showed you a picture of this tailor with a camera fitted to his head, stitching clothes. Stitching clothes is not exactly a codifiable process. It is a non-codifiable tacit skill. And now, if you're going to teach a robot how to pick up those tacit skills as well, I mean, the scale at which it's likely to do that is left to the imagination. It boggles the mind. But if it's also going to get into that space, maybe a little later than where it can pick up codified knowledge is already there. It picks it up from text and so on. But what if it starts mapping out all the non-codified part of human experience as well? And then it begins to replace even the craftspeople, etc., the painters, or the even, the other kinds of artisans who just depend on non-codified knowledge. Then we really are left in a vacuum, as it were, to think about what can't AI do. And it's kind of scary, but maybe that will come at a slightly later stage.
The optimist in me wants to think that we have something truly unique that's irreplaceable, but the pragmatist in me is highly fearful of what you're talking about as well. And I'm just thinking, Pavan, given that, is there something that you think AI generally cannot do at this stage?
I do think that there is an aspect that AI can't get into. I mean, the difference is biological in some sense, right? And I'd like to think that AI can't self-abnegate. There's a rich amount of scientific literature which talks about how you build trust in society, and trust is based on sacrifice. Trust is based on costly signaling. Spence has worked on this. If I can endure pain, if I can suffer pain, if I can endure a certain set of emotions, then I become more human. AI cannot endure pain. What does it mean for an LLM to self-abnegate or experience pain? If it can't experience pain, or if it can't experience human emotions, then it really can't get into that space. So how do I even begin to treat it as the equivalent of being a human? So maybe insofar as there is a fundamental mechanistic difference between AI's inability to feel human emotions and human beings' ability to feel human emotions, we are still left with some hope that we will be able to traverse that field where we can do something that AI cannot do, and that is feel.
That's what I tell myself all the time. And recently I read Anthropic's one of the more recent findings on how their AI is operating when we are speaking to it, and what we seem to have found out, interestingly, is that it is already attempting to replicate these mood states, right? It of course cannot organically replicate the feeling, but it is already trying desperately to imitate that. So when the AI agent responds saying it is frustrated, it actually does follow a frustration protocol where its processing and language does get altered based on
But that's
what it
cheap
was
talk,
said.
isn't it?
Exactly.
It's cheap talk. So I mean, it expresses pain, but it's not feeling the pain. I mean, what does it mean for it to self-abnegate? Does it just destroy its own memory a little bit? It it probably doesn't, because it's already programmed to be efficient. So if it can't feel pain or pleasure, then it is different, right? The authenticity of its expressions then just falls through the cracks.
Absolutely.
Right.
Cheap talk, like you said. But coming to skills in that sense that we possess that perhaps AI does not. Pramath, I'm wondering, given the current, you gave an example of a hiring freeze as well, but given the current context, even in the Indian climate, where I see a lot of people in their early career stages grappling with this competition that is non-human, um, are there any anxious graduates or parents who have come to you with questions about what skills will be valuable moving forward?
No, the honest truth is no. Uh, I read about it, I hear about it, but Ashoka had a bumper year for admissions, both in terms of applications and none of the parents that I have interacted with during that. But I don't mean to sound trivialize it. I do think that people are being affected, and it's true. Uh, I have to tell you that I I did robotics research 30 years ago, and we called it AI then also. And I've lived through many of these technological uh, revolutions, evolutions, whatever you call them. I want to take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we expect human beings to do today? And maybe I'm looking at it purely a little bit from my own perspective, but the problems in this world are getting more and more complex. Most people sitting here, if they're working on development, know that you pick up any problem, it is so complicated because of all the linkages. And earlier you could work in silos and you could just do climate, but you can't do today climate without doing gender, and gender without doing poverty, and so on, right? These problems are really complex. It doesn't have to, I'm not articulating a first world issue here. I think everywhere you go. Uh, Now, I feel that we as human beings still have to take a judgment call on things, and we have to get stuff done. And the moment you take a ready solution, even if it was a solution that didn't come out of AI, forget AI for a minute. Suppose Pavan was my AI and he came and told me, Pramath, I know this thing, do it this way. Or I went and did all kinds of research. I hired 10 of you and said, I have this problem, research it and give me an answer. That's what consultants did. I've lived that life. Most of our solutions as consultants didn't really work in the real world. They didn't. Uh, you can imagine a McKinsey team being a chat GPT, right? Because once you take that input, of course, it analyzes very well. It structures things for you. It says, look, here are 3 options. These are the pros and cons. But when you go into the real world and you confront the problem and you just blindly apply, it never worked, never. And so you were paid to figure out that, look, what is the delta between what was intended and what happened? And then you go back and you say, okay, now how do I solve for this? And then how do I solve for this? And that's how you live life. Like even today, I struggle each time I get a call from a influential person threatening me with things if I didn't give somebody admission. Right now, it's an unsolvable problem in India. People expect that because you're a private university, you have a say in admissions. And I'm telling you,
I have received those requests too.
yeah, and each situation is different. If I said, okay, from now on, I'm going to train an agent to respond to such requests. The agent will give me some answers, but I'll get into deep trouble if I don't apply my own judgment to that context. Today, I got a call from an MLA's. He said, I work in so and so MLA's office. My name is Rinku. Now, if I put that thing into an LLM, it will say, do give this response to Rinku. My first thing was, I don't even know who this Rinku is, and does the MLA know? So I said, give me the MLA's number and I'll call him or ask him to call me. So I'm just saying that, and I was thinking about this, right? This, I've been thinking about this LLM, and I'm a big fan, by the way, but I see you were saying, where does it not work? I don't think it works. In a situation like this, I can put the whole university at risk because this may be an important MLA, right? And he may. So I really do think that we are making a little bit too much of it. I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's great. But it is not going to be an or, it is always going to be a and. And yes, there's the famous example of how all the people who used to light the electric lights in the gas lights in New York City lost their jobs when the street lights got electrified. But the interesting thing is that the kids who they used to pay to light, what they actually did was they would pay kids to go light the lamps while they would sit and drink and play cards because they didn't need to go. Some kid could have. That's why their jobs got outsourced, because even a kid could do it. You didn't need to be an adult to be doing it. Now, I feel for that, and that will happen, and we have to take it as a society, as a government. We have to take care of such people, and including in the private sector. But I think somewhere we have to ask ourselves what different human approach is required to get stuff done on the ground. And that's where it comes back to what I was saying earlier. What you teach and how you teach has to change. And it has. The printing press is what created this model that we are all locked into. It is really the printing press. Till you could not print books, you didn't have classrooms, not have mass classrooms. Okay, so, and that's 300 years ago. Well, not, sorry. I'm doing my math wrong, right? 1300 something.
The Chinese invented paper and then
started. So I think it is these things that, so we live in this current model. We are extolling the virtues of having a teacher, classroom, and that's how you really learn and learn from each other. And oh my God, now, of course, I very cutely said everybody has a pocket tutor. The truth is, if you don't have a classroom with a bell and a teacher, you won't go to class. The big problem in online learning is that only the self-motivated learn. How do you motivate people? Now, but those are problems we have to solve. And actually, AI is not going to give us answers to those new problems that are getting created. And I think that's what we have to understand. So I think I find a lot of debates, and sorry, I'm going on too long, but I'll stop now. I feel that it's an exciting time to look for new problems to solve. And as long as human beings, and that maybe is what is curiosity, I think as human beings, you're always looking for a new problem to solve, you will discover for yourself where AI doesn't work.
Yeah, I want to actually ask Pramath. I think this is a very interesting line of thinking. And what I have understood from what Pramath has said is that knowledge is never complete. We always need to create new knowledge because new problems are going to emerge. And whether AI is likely to map onto that new knowledge quickly enough is the big question, right? But I want to ask Pramath a question, if I may, and that is, Pramath, I was talking to a biologist from Harvard a few years ago, and my kids were still small. I have two kids, and they said, Pavan, do you know, this is one of my favorite examples. Do you know how long your kids are going to live? I said, I don't know, 70, 80. That's the life expectancy. And I said, do you know what the life expectancy of Indians was during independence? And I, I, I had a higher number than what was the case. It was 33, and now it is 70. And public health, public health systems, and so on. I didn't have an answer to this person's question, and the person said it's likely that it's going to be 150. So, my kids who were around 10 then, and then the next question was an even tougher question for me. What is it that you're going to teach them that is likely to be relevant, not now, but perhaps 60, 70 years from now? And my jaw just dropped, right? I didn't quite know what to, and I have to be bothered about that in some sense, or maybe I shouldn't be bothered about what is likely to be relevant 60 or 70 years from now. But here is a sort of a larger question, Pramath. Let us imagine a sort of a dystopian future where people don't need to be producers of new knowledge or producers of any services or goods anymore. It's the machine that's going to do all this. We become consumers in much the same way that animals in zoos are. I mean, food is delivered to their doorstep and so on and so forth. Now, this violently disturbs a sort of a connection that we've always made between our sense of identity of who we are. Evolutionary theory would tell us that, ancient human beings classified themselves perhaps as hunters or farmers or whatever. And what we did to be producers always was mixed up with our sense of identity. I'm just wondering, what might it mean then to just be passive recipients of goods and services, assuming that the political economy of the system is fixed and all these companies are uniformly owned by people and not by few private people? What would that world look like, and what will it do to our sense of purpose? Do you think we will need a lot more? I mean, this separation itself is likely to cause a lot of mental health problems. What do you think is, do you think we need to learn how to cope with mental health problems in this to prepare ourselves for this dystopian world where purpose is stripped away from our
Look,
identity?
even if you didn't bring in AI, let's say that AI, you put a lock on it. Look at what is happening to mental health. I think you're anyway headed for that. So that's my first comment about mental health. I think if you have that kind of a future, human beings won't exist. I don't want to live. What would I live for?
If you didn't have a purpose associated with your
We
identity.
all live for purpose. Actually, all of us are living for purpose.
Okay,
We may deny it. Your purpose may be to make money, but it's still purpose. If you don't have purpose, we'll all die. I think human beings will die as a species. If you think what drives all of us, I mean, and I'm not trying to be philosophical here. I'm
Right.
just being practical. I look at everybody wants a purpose. Those, and if you don't have a purpose, if I'm not talking about some exalted noble purpose, your purpose is to earn enough money to buy food for your kids, is also purpose.
But what about all those Emiratis who just get a certain amount of money every month and they don't need to work for a livelihood?
I've not met such an Emirati, I must tell you. No, I'm telling you, all those guys say, tell us how to build another university. Can you bring Ashoka here? We want to do more, right? I'm just saying that's a natural human tendency. I'm not defending the Emirati, and I'm sure there are people who are sloths, and of course we can all become spoiled, but those sloths die. They don't have life expectancy of
The Nawabs in
150
Hyderabad seemed quite happy.
Sorry?
The Nawabs in Hyderabad seemed quite happy not having to work a day.
But where are they today, right? No, look, jokes apart,
Right.
I think there are always exceptions, but I'm making a different point.
Yeah.
I'm saying, you're talking about biology. Look at the biology of, if I'm just a biological being, the big difference is between me and a cow. I don't even know how cows think, but is that we think that if I don't have a purpose to my life, there's no point living. When I was 40 years old, I lost 3 of my key male role models in 1 year. I watched them die. For the first time in my life, I actually watched somebody die. Right? It's one thing to say, oh, somebody died, or you hear about somebody's death, you show up at the funeral. But when you actually watch somebody breathe their last and the next day world goes on, you go on, you're like, what is my purpose? What am I doing? Why am I running around this stuff? Because this is what's going to happen to me also. Today you're calling me to a panel, tomorrow I won't be here, you'll call somebody else to a panel. You won't stop doing conferences because of me, right? My point is that, so then all of us, and people call it midlife, half life, whatever, now midlife will happen at 75 according to your friend. Why do these things happen? Because we are suddenly confronted that, oh my God, after making all this money, I'm still not happy. I'm not trying to make a nice to, motivational argument. I'm just saying that's what human beings are wired for. So if you don't give me anything to do, then I'll say, what am I doing here? Let me just die. I can't imagine all of us here, if you gave us everything we needed, we'll be sitting there saying, oh, this is great. I'm here, and the mental health problem will be that we'll probably find ways to just wither away and die.
Yeah, so universal income is not really a solution to this.
No, that universal income idea is for people. It's also
or for the less privileged.
Yeah,
yes, but
look, the biggest problem we haven't solved is how to look after our, humans on the planet. I mean, that is the biggest unsolved problem. And I must tell you, as long as that problem is unsolved, there'll be purpose.
yeah. So there is hope in the sense that
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm oversimplifying. When I joined McKinsey and Company, I had done coding in C++ and Pascal. None of the other consultants had done such kind of work. And what had been released at that time was Lotus 123. So most people were like, oh my God, this is like such amazing technology. All consultants will be gone because every client will now be able to do analysis. Well, guess what? The clients couldn't do the analysis. I was this guy who knew how to code. So I started building lots of Lotus 123 models, and I taught the others. And then over time, even that skill went away because all of you know how to use Microsoft Excel, and it was a tool. I couldn't outsource my judgment to Lotus 123. And the AI guys won't agree with me because they think, oh, come on, he's comparing AI so evolved, so intelligent to that stupid tool. I'm sorry, but it is a tool at my disposal. I can choose to use it. But that's what we have to teach our children. And yes, there's a challenge that we don't even teach our children that now. At least now we can start teaching our children that, because I can actually have our children do creative things at scale. So I think the onus is on us to be hopeful about the future and recognize that, yes, there could be a dystopian future, but I just don't see biologically how we'll allow that to happen.
So I see two sources of hope from what Pramath has said, and I think they're pretty compelling. And one is the creative consumption part that you talked about, how to ask the questions, because that's something that, AI can't take away from us, because even if there's a buffet, you need to know what to choose to eat. And that, as a consumer, is exclusively my right, which AI can't take away, unless I start depending on AI to make decisions as to what I consume as well. The second is, I think what he has said is, from an epistemic perspective, it's very interesting. New problems are going to be continuously added. And when new problems are continuously added, they're not going to become a part of the AI system yet. So the identification of new problems then becomes the new purpose in some sense.
Pavan, I would just like to say on that one,
right,
that AI will think it can solve that problem also, or will give you a solution to that new problem also. You will have to have the judgment to recognize whether, and you'll probably not have the judgment, and you'll take that solution and put it out there. But when it doesn't work, then you as a human will not have access to an AI that will help you deal with that situation. So those situations will always be there, is my contention. I may be too biased towards human intelligence and judgment. Yeah.
And to that, the only thing that I could add perhaps is that it's a rather cynical view. The ability to experience pain is really going to be the source of our hope in differentiating ourselves from AI.
So then identifying and searching to solve problems continues to be how we do meaning making, is what I'm understanding from
But that is who we are.
yeah,
that is who we are. I mean, this guy Samyak who's sitting there, he's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Why is he doing that? He can be sitting at home and being the Emirati, right? Why is he not doing that? Why is he going around doing all this stuff? It's not because he's some, sorry, I'm not picking on you, but you don't have to be noble and great and the Buddha, that's a basic need of every human being to have meaning. That's how we are built.
I think on that very existential, humanizing, optimistic note,
Practical.
Practical note, I would like to thank you both so much for
Thank you.
taking time
Thank
to
you.
have this conversation.
You did okay.
Thank